You cannot force a woman to miss you if she doesn't already care. That truth is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. Desire is not something you can negotiate into existence through messages, favors, or endless emotional availability. No amount of kindness, consistency, or being a good guy can manufacture attraction if the psychological conditions for it are absent. Yet, here is what most men misunderstand: while you cannot force her to miss you, you can create the conditions that cause her to think about you naturally, often unexpectedly, even when she previously believed she would not. This applies even if she has clearly told you that she only sees you as a friend, that she is not ready, or that she already knows what kind of man you are. The human mind is not static. It responds to contrast, absence, novelty, and emotional disruption far more than to logic or reassurance. The mistake most men make is trying to stay constantly present, hoping repetition will slowly turn familiarity into desire. In reality, repetition without emotional impact only turns you into background noise. What we are discussing here is not manipulation, deception, or playing childish games. It is about understanding how attraction actually works beneath conscious thought. Attraction is a response, not a reward. It forms around men who are anchored in themselves, not around men who orbit others for validation. When a man needs her attention to feel whole, that need leaks into his behavior. She senses it, even if she cannot explain why it makes her pull away. The goal is not to make her chase you out of insecurity or fear of loss. The goal is to shift your position in her mind, to move from being one of many options, predictable and emotionally safe, to becoming the man whose absence creates a quiet question she cannot easily answer. The man she catches herself thinking about in moments of boredom, curiosity, or emotional openness, not because you demanded space in her thoughts, but because something about you interrupted her expectations. This process does not involve chasing, pleading, over-communicating, or sacrificing your dignity for proximity. In fact, it requires the opposite. It requires restraint, self-respect, and the willingness to stop proving your worth to someone who has not yet earned access to it. When done correctly, the dynamic reverses. You stop trying to convince her, and she starts internally reassessing you. But before any of that can happen, you must understand why she does not miss you now. And that reason has far less to do with your looks, your effort, or your intentions than you may think. In the next part, we will break down the real psychological reason her interest feels flat, distant, or indifferent, and why trying harder is the fastest way to make it worse. If a woman doesn't miss you, it usually shows in small, subtle ways. Her replies feel short and delayed. When you suggest meeting up, she's suddenly busy or non-committal. Conversations stay polite but lack energy, curiosity, or emotional warmth. She treats you like a familiar presence rather than someone she anticipates. Many men interpret this as a signal to increase effort. They become more available, more attentive, more supportive, hoping that consistency will eventually be rewarded. Psychologically, this is where everything breaks down. The harsh truth is that trying to convince her of your value often confirms the very doubt that keeps her uninterested. When you overinvest without receiving equal emotional engagement, you silently communicate that you see yourself as lower value than her, not in words, but in structure. Attraction does not respond to persuasion, it responds to contrast, and when you give more while she gives less, you remove all contrast in your favor. At the core of the issue is the absence of scarcity. Your attention is always there. It costs her nothing. It is not limited, exclusive, or earned. Because of that, it carries very little psychological weight. You become part of her emotional environment. Like background music she no longer actively hears, familiar, safe, and easily ignored. This effect is amplified in the modern world. Most women are constantly surrounded by male attention, messages, likes, Reactions, compliments, and casual flirtation are always available, often from multiple sources at once. Her nervous system adapts by filtering most of it out. This filtering is not personal, it is protective. The brain learns to ignore what is common in order to conserve energy and emotional focus. So when she seems indifferent, it is rarely because you are not good enough. It is because you have not created a meaningful difference. Humans are drawn to contrast. We overlook what is abundant and crave what feels rare. The man who stands out is not the one who gives the most, but the one whose presence and absence both register emotionally. Understanding this reframes the entire situation. You are not failing because you lack effort. You are failing because effort without scarcity creates emotional numbness. Once you grasp this, the solution becomes counterintuitive but powerful. To make her miss you. You do not add more, you remove something. Here's the paradox that most men struggle to accept. The fastest way to make a woman think about you is not to increase your presence, but to reduce it, not to give more attention, but to create the experience of less. Attraction does not grow in saturation, it grows in contrast. When everything is always available, nothing feels valuable. When something quietly disappears, the mind begins to search for it. The human brain is deeply uncomfortable with unfinished patterns. When a familiar emotional signal is suddenly removed, it creates a small but persistent psychological tension. This tension is not pain, it is curiosity. It manifests as questions she did not intend to ask. Why hasn't he messaged? Why does his name no longer show up? What changed the moment those questions appear? You have shifted from being invisible to being mentally present. This is why absence, when done correctly, is more powerful than attention. It creates a void, and the void does the work for you. You are no longer trying to insert yourself into her thoughts. Her own mind begins to pull you in, attempting to restore balance. This process feels natural to her because it is internally generated. It does not feel like pressure or manipulation. Most men sabotage this principle by misunderstanding it. They disappear emotionally but remain psychologically available. They stop texting, but keep watching her stories. They avoid reaching out, yet stay emotionally attached, hoping she will notice their silence. This does nothing. True absence must be clean. It must remove both your presence and your energetic availability. The key insight is this: curiosity only forms when something valuable feels uncertain, not when it feels rejected or hostile. That is why the disappearance must be calm, quiet, and unannounced. No dramatic exits, no speeches, no passive-aggressive behavior. The power comes from the contrast between what was and what is no longer there. When you withdraw correctly, you are not punishing her. You are reclaiming your own center. You are no longer orienting your emotional life around her reactions. That internal shift is often felt before it is seen. Women are extremely sensitive to changes in emotional positioning, even when nothing explicit is said. This paradox marks the turning point. It moves the dynamic from one-sided effort to psychological balance. But knowing the principle is not enough. Execution matters. In the next part, we will talk about the first concrete step: how to disappear from her front row in a way that triggers awareness instead of resentment, curiosity instead of closure. The first practical step is to remove yourself from her front row without making it an event. This is where most men fail. Not because the idea is wrong, but because their execution is emotionally loaded. They announce their absence. They block dramatically. They send long messages explaining their feelings or declaring that they are done. All of that keeps you psychologically present. It turns your disappearance into a performance, and performances still center her attention on you in a predictable way. Instead, you disappear quietly. You stop showing up in the small, habitual spaces where she has grown used to seeing you. You no longer text just to check in. You no longer send good morning messages or casual follow-ups. You stop liking her posts, reacting to her stories, or watching her updates, not to provoke jealousy, not to make a point, but because you are genuinely stepping back from a position that was costing you leverage and self-respect. In the digital age, this kind of absence is far more noticeable than physical distance. People are conditioned to patterns. When your name appears regularly in notifications, messages, and reactions, the brain registers it as a stable signal. When that signal abruptly stops, the brain flags it as an anomaly. This is known as a pattern interrupt. The mind hates unfinished loops, and it will often revisit them unconsciously. This is why disappearing online often has a stronger psychological effect than simply not seeing someone in person. You are no longer part of her daily digital environment. There is no reminder, no passive reassurance of your availability. Your silence is not loud, but it is unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity is what reactivates awareness. It is crucial that this withdrawal feels neutral, not hostile. You are not cold, you are not rude. If you cross paths in real life, you are calm, grounded, and unchanged. The absence is not emotional punishment, it is energetic realignment. You are stepping out of a role that was diminishing your impact. This step does two things simultaneously. Externally, it creates space for curiosity to emerge. Internally, it forces you to stop seeking validation from her responses. That internal shift is just as important as the external silence. Without it, the disappearance becomes hollow and short-lived. But disappearing alone is not enough. Many men vanish, then sit at home emotionally frozen, constantly checking her social media and waiting for a sign. That kind of absence has no power. In the next part, we will address the most common mistake men make during this phase and how to transform disappearance into genuine attraction by building a life that continues to move forward. With or without her. This is where many men sabotage themselves without realizing it. They disappear externally, but internally they remain stuck. They stop texting her, yet spend their nights refreshing her social media, replaying conversations, and waiting for validation to arrive in the form of a notification. From the outside, it looks like restraint. On the inside, it is still attachment. And attachment without action is never attractive. Absence only works when it is filled with forward motion. If you vanish and your life shrinks, nothing changes energetically, you are simply invisible and stagnant. The psychological effect only appears when your absence is paired with growth, momentum, and visibility. Not performative visibility, but real-life movement that can be felt when you re-enter her awareness. The requirement during this phase is simple but demanding. You must build a life that does not pause just because she is no longer at the center of it. You invest in friendships you neglected. You return to physical training. Not to impress her, but to re-anchor yourself in your body. You pursue interests that generate stories, energy, and presence. Travel if possible. Learn something that stretches your identity. Take new photos not as bait, but as documentation of a life in motion. When she eventually becomes aware of this shift, two subtle thoughts begin to form. The first is disorienting to her ego. He's actually fine without me, not pretending, not collapsing, simply continuing. This breaks the unconscious assumption that your attention was guaranteed. The second thought is more dangerous and more powerful. If he is doing this without me, who is he doing it with? Curiosity is born not from jealousy alone, but from uncertainty mixed with value. This is why trying to disappear while secretly suffering rarely works. Emotional stagnation leaks through behavior when contact resumes. Your tone is off, Your energy feels heavy. Women are extraordinarily sensitive to this. They may not articulate it, but they feel it immediately. Growth, on the other hand, is felt even before it is seen. It is also important to understand that this phase is not about posting constantly or trying to provoke a reaction. Overexposure kills mystery. You want just enough visibility to signal that life is happening, not enough to narrate every detail. The point is not to prove anything. The point is to become someone whose absence feels justified rather than suspicious. When done correctly, something interesting happens. You stop waiting. You stop counting days. Your self-worth begins to detach from her response. Ironically, this is often the moment when her curiosity peaks, because your energy no longer reaches out toward her. It stands on its own. But absence and growth alone are still only the foundation. The next layer is what truly locks memory and curiosity together. In the next part, we will explore how social proof and subtle memory triggers can cause her to think about you without you saying a word, and why the mind remembers emotion far longer than attention. Once absence and forward motion are established, the next layer works almost automatically. This is where social proof and memory triggers quietly amplify everything without you forcing anything. Social proof is not about showing off or trying to make her jealous. In fact, obvious attempts to provoke envy usually backfire. Real social proof is subtle. It is the quiet signal that other people enjoy being around you, that your presence has value beyond her validation, and that your life contains depth she does not fully see. When you share moments of your life that naturally include other people, especially women, something important happens in her mind. She does not think, "He is trying to make me jealous," she thinks. Others see something in him that activates a different psychological circuit. Value perceived through others feels more trustworthy than value claimed directly. This is why a man surrounded by genuine connection feels more attractive than a man constantly explaining his intentions. At the same time, memory triggers begin to do their work. Human memory is not logical. It is associative. Certain songs, phrases, scents, jokes, or shared references bypass conscious resistance and go straight to emotional recall. These triggers are powerful because they are personal. They belong to the space that once existed between you. When she encounters one of them in daily life, you appear in her mind without warning. You did not reach out. You did not remind her. Her own nervous system did. This is where many men underestimate their impact. They believe attraction is stored in attention. In reality, it is stored in emotional imprint. If you were the man who challenged her thinking, who introduced new perspectives, who made her question assumptions or see the world differently, your absence becomes more noticeable. She does not just miss the attention you gave her. She misses the way conversations felt with you, the stimulation, the sense of expansion. That kind of absence is far more difficult to replace. Intellectual stimulation plays a critical role here. When a woman associates you with new ideas, deeper conversations, or moments where she felt mentally alive, your disappearance leaves a cognitive gap. Other men may offer attention, validation, or flirtation, but they do not replicate the internal experience you created. The brain does not crave what is easy, it craves what felt meaningful. This is why growth during absence matters so much. When you continue developing your perspectives, skills, and identity, the version of you she eventually encounters is not frozen in the past. It feels evolved. That evolution retroactively reframes her memory of you. She starts to wonder if she misjudged you, if there was more there than she allowed herself to see. At this stage, you are no longer trying to make her miss you. You are allowing her mind to do what it naturally does when something valuable becomes uncertain and emotionally distinct. And eventually, that curiosity seeks resolution. That is where timing becomes everything. Reappearing too early collapses tension. Reappearing too late dissolves relevance. In the next part, we will talk about how and when to re-enter her world strategically, without explanation or apology, and why the way you return matters more than the fact that you do. Re-emergence is where everything either comes together or quietly falls apart. Most men undo weeks of psychological momentum by returning too fast or returning as the same version of themselves. Timing is not about strategy in the manipulative sense. It is about allowing the absence to fully register. If you reappear 2 days later, nothing has had time to shift. If you return the moment she sends a casual "Hey, stranger," you signal that you were waiting. That collapses the tension instantly. In most situations, the right window is somewhere between 2 and 6 weeks, depending on how frequently you interacted before. This is usually long enough for your absence to be felt, processed, and reinterpreted. By this point, if curiosity is formed, it is no longer fragile, it is stable. She has already filled in the silence with her own narratives. Your job is not to explain or correct them. When you re-enter, you do so without announcements, without apologies, and without justification. You do not say you needed space. You do not explain what you were doing. You do not reference the disappearance at all. Explanations shift the focus back to insecurity and defense. Silence communicates confidence. You show up as a man who has been living, not hiding. The most important element here is energy, not forced confidence, not charm, not exaggerated positivity. Grounded presence. You are calmer, less reactive, less eager to impress. Your attention is warm but selective. This signals a fundamental shift in your internal position. You are no longer seeking something from her. You are sharing a moment with her. Conversations feel different because you feel different. You listen without leaning. You speak without trying to steer the outcome. You allow pauses. You allow uncertainty. Women are extremely sensitive to these microdynamics. Even if she cannot articulate why, she will feel that you are no longer the same man who is always available, always accommodating, always predictable. If she reaches out first, you respond naturally, not immediately, not with rehearsed indifference. If you initiate, you do so simply. No heavy emotional hooks, no references to the past. A light invitation, a shared context, something present-focused. The past has already done its work. You do not need to reopen it. What often surprises men is that by the time they re-emerge, they no longer feel the same urgency. The outcome matters less. This is not because they stopped caring entirely, but because their sense of self expanded. They are no longer emotionally cornered by one woman's response, and that is precisely what makes the interaction work. At this stage, the shift is visible. Indifference begins to soften into interest. Interest turns into intrigue, and intrigue is the doorway to something deeper. But the real win is not whether she chooses you. The real win is that you are no longer trying to be chosen. In the final part, we will tie everything together and clarify why this process is not a trick to make someone miss you, but a framework for becoming a man who is difficult to forget, regardless of the outcome. When this process is done correctly, the result is a quiet but unmistakable shift. What once felt like indifference begins to turn into interest. Interest deepens into intrigue. And intrigue is powerful because it is self-sustaining. She is no longer responding to what you give her, but to what she feels when she thinks about you. You are no longer chasing attention. You have become a presence her mind returns to on its own. What matters most here is understanding why this works. It is not because you played hard to get. It is not because you withheld affection to trigger anxiety. And it is not because you followed a set of tactics designed to manipulate emotions. It works because you stopped leaking your self-worth into someone else's hands. You reclaimed your center, your time, and your direction. The psychological shift in her is a side effect of the structural shift in you. A man who builds a full, grounded life becomes attractive whether a specific woman responds or not. That is the part most men miss. They focus on the outcome, not the transformation. But the transformation is what changes outcomes across the board. When you are no longer trying to be remembered, you become memorable. When you stop performing for approval, your presence gains weight. When you are willing to walk away from emotional dead ends, you naturally occupy a different category in the minds of others. This is why this approach is not a game. Games require constant monitoring, adjustment, and fear of losing. What we have described is the opposite. It is alignment. It is living in a way that does not depend on being chosen, liked, or validated by one person. Ironically, that independence is what makes connection possible again. If she comes back with curiosity, interest, or renewed energy, you will be able to meet her without resentment or desperation. You will not need to interrogate her intentions or demand clarity. You will feel stable enough to let things unfold naturally. And if she does not come back, you still win, because you are no longer stuck in a loop of overgiving, waiting, and self-doubt. You're moving forward with momentum. The deepest shift happens inside you. You stop seeing attraction as something you must earn through effort. You begin to see it as a response to how you live, how you carry yourself, and how you relate to your own value. That shift changes the way women experience you. But more importantly, it changes the way you experience yourself. This is how men become unforgettable, not by trying to stay in someone's mind, but by building a life that does not collapse without their attention. If you found value in this perspective, take a moment to reflect on where you have been over-investing and where you have been avoiding growth. Real change starts there.